So I've made it no secret here on the channel that I'm a big fan of the Castlevania series. I've reviewed many games in the franchise in the past, including Aria of Sorrow, Symphony of the Night, Dawn of Sorrow, and various other titles through the years. But there's still several Metroidvania games that I've never really reviewed here on the channel that I've had the pleasure of playing for the first time over the past few years. I say pleasure, however, with the remaining games I've yet to cover here on the show, because the game that we're going to be taking a look at today is Castlevania Circle of the Moon. Now, this game here is one that's beloved by many people. This was the first major Castlevania game to come out in the Game Boy Advance when it released back in 2001, and when it came out, it received rave reviews from many people. Now, I want to say right off the bat, I don't agree with a lot of the praise that Circle of the Moon has received. I actually think Circle of the Moon is an okay game, and I want to make it clear right off the bat for a lot of hardcore fans that I don't hate the game. I think it has some good attributes to it as well. It's pretty impressive in a few ways. But this is one Castlevania game that's pretty average for me, and not really one I can strongly recommend for a number of reasons, just because of the issues that it has. Nonetheless, though, let's take a look and see what made Circle of the Moon so revolutionary and loved when it first came out, and why the nostalgia goggles may have blinded some people's perceptions to it over the years. For one of the first major sections I usually cover with my reviews, I will not be knocking Circle of the Moon too much from a visual perspective, because believe it or not, a bit of Game Boy Advance history here, Circle of the Moon was one of the first 3 Game Boy Advance games ever released back in 2001. And at the time, it was still pretty impressive, given the visuals of handhelds back then weren't exactly the highest priority until the later years of the Nintendo DS and then the advancement of the Game Boy Advance. Circle of the Moon still looks pretty impressive for what it is. The character models, the sprites, the backgrounds, the different areas of Dracula's castle that you actually visit. While it's not the most detailed Castlevania game ever released, in fact 2 years later when Harmony of Dissonance released on the same console, the visuals were highly upgraded. And even Symphony of the Night that released before it does look more impressive with the pixel art, but it does look pretty good in terms of a Game Boy Advance title, once again given the fact this is one of the original Game Boy Advance games that is released. Despite how pixelated and kind of washed out the color palette may look, the attack animations look good, the character models, the bosses that you face, it looks pretty impressive for a handheld. The soundtrack is phenomenal as well. This is also one of those areas that no matter how I feel about any Castlevania game, every single game, including Circle of the Moon, excels in its fantastic soundtrack. It's really no surprise, Castlevania has one of the most notorious video game soundtracks ever made, so the fact of the matter is Circle of the Moon has a ton of awesome tracks, whether it's a rendition of Vampire Killer near the pinnacle of the castle, a remix of the Bloodlines theme, Sinking Old Sanctuary, playing throughout many different areas throughout the castle, and Awake, which is the very first track that you hear when Nathan is dropped into the catacombs by Dracula. The point is, the soundtrack of this game is fantastic. The only real criticism that I have on this one is how often Sinking Old Sanctuary is actually used. Not because it's a bad track by any means, it's one of my personal favorites, but it's used in so many different areas of the castle, kind of making the whole musical score more limited compared to other games. But from a visual and musical perspective, Circle of the Moon is still pretty damn impressive. for you hardcore Castlevania fans who love this game. From here on out, the rest of this review isn't going to be as kind to Circle of the Moon, so yeah, here's your pre-warning. Please don't hate me too much. There's one thing the Castlevania series really isn't that well known for, is its story. Now, with the exception of a few games throughout the series, like Portrait of Ruin or Dawn of Sorrow, the Metroidvania titles really don't have an in-depth story. And considering Circle of the Moon has been deemed non-canon by one of the lead developers behind the series, Koji Igarashi, the story in itself really doesn't have a big impact on the franchise. And even if it was canon, the story itself really isn't anything super in-depth. You play as an upcoming vampire hunter known as Nathan Graves, traveling to Dracula's castle with his friend Hugh and his master. They end up infiltrating Dracula's castle, meeting with a woman who's infatuated with him named Camilla. She resurrects Dracula. Dracula ends up kidnapping Nathan's master, holding him captive throughout most of the game. And Nathan and Hugh split up to search Dracula's castle with the vampire killer whip, even though it's called the Hunter's Whip in this game. They travel on the castle, defeating bosses, and eventually make their way back to the top of the castle to destroy Dracula and rescue their master. It's a pretty simple story, nothing too in-depth to really talk about, but to be honest, compared to a lot of other later Castlevania games, the characters really aren't that fleshed out. You only meet Hugh a few times throughout the game. They try to develop this rivalry between Nathan and Hugh about who's supposed to rightfully inherit the Hunter's Whip in this game. It really doesn't go anywhere, not really a lot of stakes. You only meet Camilla twice throughout the entire game, at the beginning and during her boss fight, and the encounter with Dracula really doesn't have a lot of build-up, not really a lot of personal stakes since the Belmont clan's not really involved this time around. The story here is very simple, it's pretty non-existent, nothing special to talk about even by Castlevania standards, and I wasn't a huge fan of it, but of course when you're playing a Castlevania game like a Metroidvania, the story isn't really going to be relevant, it's the gameplay and exploration you're going to want to focus on. Alright, like with many other Castlevania games, the premise of it is pretty simple. Using different abilities, equipment, and weapons that you get throughout the game, you play as your main character traveling through Dracula's castle, filling in the overarching map where you can use to destroy enemies that respawn. You have RPG mechanics that level up your character the more you go, hidden rooms that allow you to find upgradable equipment, and then the more you travel through Dracula's castle, the more you encounter big looming boss fights with great designs, eventually making your way up to the top of the castle, following whatever story is present, and ending it off with a big climactic showdown, for the most part against Dracula, with the exception of a few games. That's the general gameplay formula we have here, traveling throughout the castle, defeating bosses, destroying constantly respawning enemies in the different rooms of the castle, and overall having a fun time with the exploration. Circle of the Moon, however, compared to Symphony of the Night before it, doesn't really have the best castle design. The castle itself has a number of different areas that you can explore, starting in the catacombs from the bottom levels and working your way up to the top. The areas really aren't all that memorable, especially compared to other titles in the series, where you have different areas that you can visit, like the library, the ballroom, the pinnacle of the castle, the art gallery. Basically, a lot of iconic areas aren't present in this version of Dracula's castle, and while they're fine in terms of substance and enemies, castle design really isn't anything to write home about, which is a core of the gameplay experience. Not really a huge fan of it in this game just because of how lacking it is. And the fact of the matter is, the enemies themselves really aren't all that imaginative this time around. The visuals of the GBA definitely don't help since this was an earlier title, but considering how this is supposed to be a very iconic part of Castlevania, there really isn't a lot to talk about in terms of the castle layout or the enemy design. It's fine for what it is. It's very basic, generic. Basically, it's a rinse and repeat job of a lot of common enemies you see throughout the series. Skeletons, bats, zombies, that kind of thing. There's not really a lot of unique enemies that show up here. And the boss fights, as far as they go, well, it's something that's definitely unique to the series, and there are a few boss fights that I do enjoy throughout the game, like the giant goat monster that you fight at the top of the that you fight in the top of the church, or at the very beginning of the game where you fight off against Cerberus, kind of fitting that it's in the lower basement of the castle. But the fact of the matter is, the castle layout, the enemy variety, and the boss fights really don't stand out all too well, and this is a core part of the gameplay experience that I'm just not a huge fan of in this game. Outside of the generic castle layout, boss fights, and enemy variety, another core part of the gameplay is the actual combat itself, where you're going through with your vampire killer whip, and you're going and taking out enemies. Each Castlevania game has this as a simple premise, depending on the game we're talking about, but Circle of the Moon brings a few unique gameplay functions to the table. Whereas the games with Soma Cruz for Dawn and Aria Sara have the Soul system, where you can inherit monster souls to use their abilities, this game offers its own variety with the DSL card system. Basically, when you defeat enemies, there's a small chance that they'll drop an attribute card. You equip them to your person, and you're able to use a wide variety of abilities, like being able to channel your whip into a flaming whip, allowing you more health the more you defeat enemies. You have upgraded jumps. There's basically a lot of perks that you can use with this card system. However, it's not reliable whatsoever. Enemies rarely ever drop these cards, they're rarely ever useful in battle, and quite frankly, whenever you use them, they use up a large amount of MP, making them very trivial to use during boss fights. The drop rate alone is a very big issue, and while it's a cool idea on paper and offers a unique gimmick for the game, I don't find them to be all too useful with the exception of a few cards. The fact of the matter is, because of how low the drop rate is, you're going to be going in and out of rooms, wasting tons of time trying to get the certain cards that you want. By the way, this game having a lack of a feature telling you what cards are associated with what enemies, you're not going to discover a lot of these until the late game, if you even know they exist in the first place. For the most part, you're just going to be going with your base equipment, trying to find upgrades throughout the castle in order to progress. At the end of the day, well, this is a unique idea, not really the best implementation of it, and not really one of the best mechanics in a Castlevania game. My biggest issues with Circle of the Moon is the difficulty. Now, Circle of the Moon is made difficult not because of the enemies, or the boss fights, or the castle design, or anything else, despite how lackluster and generic it really is, but it's because Circle of the Moon takes many steps back with the gameplay. Circle of the Moon amps up the difficulty at a certain point in the game where it starts spamming enemy after you, and you don't have a healthy stock of potions or equipables on hand to cure yourself of status ailments or to raise your HP up. The reason for that is, one, drops are very low for each enemy. So, if you're thinking about grinding a certain enemy to get potions and whatnot, that's the only way that you're getting them in this game. The drop rate is extremely low, and you're not going to have a reliable way to heal throughout most of the entire game, making boss fights and traveling through different areas of the castle more difficult than what they need to be. The reason that it's your only method to grind enemies, which again has a low drop rate like the card system, is because there's no shop in Circle of the Moon. While I understand that Harmony of Dissonance employed a very lackluster shop system, having it only being available in one of the two versions of the castle, the fact of the matter is, it actually had a shop system. Circle of the Moon completely doesn't have any method possible for you to buy new armor, to buy new weapon upgrades, to buy health, to buy anything for that matter, that every other Castlevania game for the most part has done. Fact of the matter is, it's not that reliable, all things considered. conclude this video, guys, Circle of the Moon is not a bad game. I know that I mentioned a lot of negative points that I really didn't care for about this one, but like I said before, it's not a bad game. This is one Castlevania game that deserves to be remembered for its legacy and for getting the series its start on the Game Boy Advance, where it would survive for a long time before its transition to the Nintendo DS. But the fact of the matter is, this definitely feels like a game Koji Igarashi did not work on, which he didn't, and he's responsible for working on so many fantastic games in the series for the story, visuals, music, gameplay, everything that makes a Castlevania game brilliant. You can definitely tell he wasn't behind this one because of the sheer amount of issues that it has. Circle of the Moon is a game that I could cautiously recommend for people to try out if you're new to the series or you've never experienced the title. I won't say don't play it because it does have some redeeming qualities. The visuals look impressive for the early Game Boy Advance despite how lackluster they might be, and the soundtrack is absolutely incredible to listen to. But the major gameplay experience here really isn't the best in the series. The story is more lackluster than usual with forgettable characters. The gameplay structure of the actual castle is bland and frustrating to go through. A lot of enemies that can one instant kill you that are just way too many after a certain point in the game. And the card system not being the best with a lack of good drops and good abilities to use, along with the lack of a shop that you can actually buy health restoring items at, being forced to rely on, once again, unreliable drops from enemies that make for a more frustrating gameplay experience. Circle of the Moon, all in all, was an alright game. Not one of my favorite Metroidvanias or Castlevania games by any means, but it's definitely one I could recommend, again, if you're a newcomer to the series, but this isn't one of the stronger games for me, in my opinion. That's going to do it for this one, guys. Thank you for checking out this video. I know this review might be a little more controversial for you hardcore Castlevania fans, or people that are major fans of Circle of the Moon, but the fact of the matter remains, this is just one man's opinion. If you guys love the game, I absolutely won't take that away from all of you. Continue to love and enjoy the game, but to me, it's okay. But let me know what you guys think about the game. Do you love Circle of the Moon? Do you agree with my opinion? Do you disagree with what I had to say? And you absolutely enjoy this one, despite some of the issues that I've mentioned? Do you guys have any experience playing it in general? Let me know your thoughts on Circle of the Moon in the comments. Give the video a like if you did enjoy it. And subscribe to the channel if you guys want to keep up with future reviews, unboxing videos, collection videos, content creator collaborations, and everything else we do here on the channel. But that's all from me. And until next time, guys, this has been Ryan from the Nostalgia Factor saying, keep on gaming.